All right, I'm here with Dr. Brandon Brown. He is the Migraine doc, author of Migraine Secrets and the Migraine Society. Dr. Brandon, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Dude, excited to connect with you. We connected about 6 months ago at the last event, or actually it was 3 months ago in Dallas, and here we are again at the Black Diamond Club event in Nashville. And I got a chance to follow you over the last 3 months, and you have created this amazing niche with migraines. I'm curious though, how did you get into that route? Like how did that all spin out?
So that's probably the most common question I get is you have to understand when people struggle with migraine and they find me and they're so curious, and I think one of the things people want to see with you is that you really have a passion for what it is that you do, and I am super passionate about this. The story I always tell people is everything for me started with my wife. My wife used to really struggle with migraines for a long time, and with the way that I help people who struggle with migraine, with the approach that we use, I watched that be able to change my wife's life. But because that was a very short period of time of us being around one another. So it wasn't like I experienced what I see a lot of my patients. I always tell them, I'm not typically you, I'm your spouse, I'm your family, I'm the significant other that supported you. Now, last year I got my first ever of experiencing what that's like for literally just a couple months, and I'm like,
a migraine?
Yeah, we can get into that. That's
and I'm also curious because you know this as a healer, you have a background in chiropractic, but as a healer, very oftentimes I've seen this happen to some of the greatest healers. They manifest and take on the symptoms of the people because they're talking about it all the time. They become it. They become their disease. Is that what you feel like happened? And then were you even like, there's a subconscious thing where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened to me. Like this is not even real.
So I wish it was that simple. And before we get into it, because I think that might be the story that takes over the whole thing. So it started with my wife that kind of took me down that route of, I'm watching it change her life. And then what happened for me was in my first year, you're trying to get your feet wet, you're trying to figure this thing out, you're running 1,000,000 miles a minute in every direction. And two of my patients, when I first started in my first year, that got the greatest results were both migraine patients, both 15 plus years, one male, one female. Like when you look at typically migraines more commonly for females, that's kind of majority of what I tend to see. It's probably 9 out of 10 people that come in to see me, it's mostly females, and then some males that come in, men can be affected by it too.
And but typically, sorry to cut you off, do you think that's hormonal? Is it typical in your opinion? Or
it can be, but I think a lot of that is I think we've been taught to think that it's that when really there's a few facets. There's the neurological and structural component, there's the hormonal component, there's also just overall, when you start looking at blood work, we've advanced a lot in how we can do blood tests, but we've not advanced in how doctors will order and recommend things. Most times, if you get a basic blood test, you're getting 100 tests.
We're talking about the Western doc.
Yeah.
Typical Western, I agree.
Because you're getting 100 tests of the 3,500 that we could probably do. Now, I also don't think that it needs to be that complex. One of my core values within my office is that things need to be simple. If I can't explain this to you in a way that makes sense, then it's confusing, and why would you even want to do that? Like if I'm ever going to do anything, it's like it needs to make sense. It needs to have a flow and a process.
Like you said, structural, neurological, hormonal. There's probably like 3-5 pillars, and it's like if we go through all 5 of these, we're going to figure it out, right? Is that how you tell people?
Yeah, if we get your blood tested and we figure out that there's deficiencies, typically it's more mineral and vitamin, because a lot of that is if we can get the basic building blocks and the things that allow your body to build itself, then you're fine. And then the last one that nobody ever wants to talk about, and we always kind of push under the rug, is like the trauma portion of people have been through shit in their life and it impacts them and they carry it and they don't realize that all starts to tie in with this of why they're feeling so sick and why they feel like they can't overcome this. Mine, interestingly enough, I've always had to work that journey of like being able to hold space for people who are sick and who are struggling, but then also have the ability to like let that go. And that's also in my own journey of taking care of myself and making sure that I have routines and ways to manage that. What had happened to me was, so I have a predisposition of, I've had a lot of ear infections as a kid when I was growing up.
Me too.
I've had a few as an adult. So last year, kind of into the summer, going into the fall, I started getting one that was bothering me on my left ear. And I'm typically the person like, I'm going to just make sure I'm taking care of myself. I'm going to keep my ear cleaned out. I'm going to let my body do its thing. It'll get better.
For you also, is it structural? Like I know chiropractors will adjust those inner tubes, those eustachian tubes, and that'll help drainage properly.
I think it was, because usually that's the thing. Like we see so many kids in our office with the upper cervical type care that we use. It's like when you get that aligned, you're allowing for that drain. Like there's so many things that can impact there that you don't realize everything's all connected. So a lot of times I believe it technically is that. This one is one of those freak incidences that's like, I'm the exception, not the rule. What happened was I got a really bad ear infection. I didn't treat it properly. Even when we went in to check, it was like, oh, it looks like an external ear infection. We'll put the drops in, we'll do all this.
Yep.
Well, so on September 1st, my wife woke up at like 5 a.m. to me having a seizure. Never had a seizure in my life.
Holy cow.
I came to on the floor of our bedroom with 2 firefighters helping me walk out of my house. I mean, it's early in the morning. I don't even know what's going on. Like I go to bed, next thing I know, I've got guys helping me up off the ground, off the floor of my bedroom. I can't really talk yet because I'm not really processing. I thought I was being arrested. So I'm like being carried out of and I'm looking at my wife and she could tell by the look on my face and she's like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Meanwhile, my daughters are still asleep in their bedrooms. I've fortunately got a friend of mine who's a medical doctor. He went with me so my wife could stay home with the girls, rode with me to the hospital, CT, MRI, came back clear like they typically would. And at this point, I get it. Looking back on it now, what we think happened, so that was September 1st. On October 31st, I had to have an emergency brain surgery. So what had happened was the bacteria sitting in my ear.
Just want to make sure so September you have a seizure. October, so another month.
Yep.
2 months,
Like
because
2
at the end of the
months,
month, you have an emergency brain surgery.
Yep.
Holy cow.
So, and it progressed quickly. It was one of the scariest times of my life. For me, it shifted such a perspective of now I have this level of gratitude, which I think people will see so I just consistently am getting a little bit more sick and a little bit more sick. And I'm starting to take on more symptoms of like, hey, this should be an issue. So go get the CT and MRI. They want to do a spinal tap. I don't want to. I refuse it. I'm like, I don't want to do that. They do that for migraine patients. And they're like, after I get it done, it's the worst migraine I've ever had. Because you're going in and you're putting a hole in someone's spinal cord. Like they typically have to go and do what's called a blood patch to get it to stop. It's a whole thing. Most people have horrible experiences with it.
So anyone's listening, spinal tap, and there's always extreme circumstances, but if that's like a viable solution, your recommendation, people listening would be like, don't do that.
I would not for general. Someone who's struggling with migraine if they haven't done anything, especially if they're giving you, like a lot of times with that, you'll get something like what's called idiopathic intracranial hypertension. We could just break that down really simply. Idiopathic. We don't know where it comes from. Right. Intracranial, inside of your head, increased pressure.
Pain in the brain.
Yes.
Pain in the head. Yeah.
You're having pressure and tension that's going on inside, and we can't figure out what the heck is going on. So because I was all clear, they couldn't figure anything out. They gave me a couple things of IVs, but like sent me home. Like went home, laid on the couch most of the day. My wife could clearly tell I was not doing well. Took my girls to my in-laws and took me to the hospital the next day on Saturday. Because I tried going to my IV place. I was like, I think I'm just really wiped out. I went and got an IV. I was trying to take care of myself.
NAD or something.
And she was like, you're not doing well. I'm taking you back to the hospital. She took me to a different hospital. They wouldn't let me in unless I did the spinal tap. I was being a turd and didn't want to. And I was like, just let them do it and they'll let you in.
Yeah.
And so finally they got me to do it. I was so dehydrated. They were having a hard time even getting enough fluid out of me to be able to test.
Wow.
So they're obviously concerned because I've had a seizure. They put me on anti-seizure medication, which had me all jacked up. I was in the hospital for like 4 or 5 days. Scans of my liver, scans of my heart, blood tests all the time, constantly, all sorts of stuff. They're like, we can't figure anything out. Have you had any symptoms? I'm like, I've had a really bad ear infection for probably about a month now that's really been bothering me. And they told me that could have nothing to do with it. That's what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
So they finally find, well, there's some bacteria in your blood. We're going to put you on an antibiotic. Started to feel a little bit better. Sent me home. And I just started to notice things for me that just aren't typical. Like I couldn't go to the gym more than a couple days a week. I would be wrecked.
Wow.
I was really tired. Wasn't able to be typically like the dad that I am of like being super active with my kids. Let's go do stuff. Like I'm the let's go do stuff person, not, hey, let's sit at home. I would be like, my wife would want to go do something. I'm like, let's do that. But then let's get back to that. Like looking back on it afterwards when we reflected, it's like I wanted to do all these things because I was just trying to protect myself. Then I started having like weird neurological things. So one time going into the clinic, I had a patient who had flown in town to come see me, because that happens pretty frequently. And I was walking down the hallway to my office, and my right leg just like short circuited on me, gave out. I fell down, and I was like, what in the heck is going on here? Like, slow down for a second, go in the office, like get the door open. I sit in the chair, and I'm like just trying to breathe and calm down. And I'm like, what in the hell is going on? Like, that was very weird. Like, my leg just literally like short circuit, like just couldn't hold me up and just gave out. Then I was starting to have a little bit of visual loss in my right eye. So you have to realize the way that your nerves in your brain for your eyes, they cross. So this visual field is coming from this left side. So, and also when you're talking about lower leg weakness, it's like that. The way that those go, it's like it should have been telltale signs that that's what was going on.
Hence the left ear, right leg circuiting. It
was all the things that were going on. And it was like, it should have been signs. But the problem was, I went to the hospital, I had all the tests done possible that you could get, and they told me I was fine. So unfortunately, I did what I tell my patients they're not supposed to do, which is, I guess you're just supposed to live that way. Yet I decided to do that because it was just like, maybe I did something to my ear. Maybe I really jacked this up. Like, maybe something is going on.
Yeah.
Well, the longer that bacteria sat in my ear, it ate through my bone in my skull, got into my brain. And
my God.
I started having migraines. I was having TMJ and jaw pain. I could barely eat. Like, everything was getting awful. Like, I would literally get one of those like rice bags that you heat up in the microwave, and I would go lay on the couch so that I wasn't keeping my wife awake, even though she's like, when you're not in the bedroom, I'm awake. But I would lay on the couch with that on my face. It's the only way I could get a little bit of sleep. But I mean, in the couple months of me dealing with these migraines and TMJ and all this stuff, I'm like, I don't know how people live with this for 15, 20, like people live with this stuff for a long time. I don't know how they do it. I was miserable. I was awful. I was probably an asshole. Like, there's just so many things where I'm like, I was probably not the most fun person to be around, all while still trying to run a business. I'm still trying to take care of people, but it's like, there's only so much I can do. I've got a new doc working for me. It's like all these things going on, all while I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Well,
what's fascinating too is that when you're sick and you're a healer, you know a lot of this stuff. But I find this happen even for my wife or me. Like, when one of us goes down, we don't think as well. Like, all the protocols that we know if someone else, like our kids have, we do this, this, and this. But it's like you almost need your own advocate. You need another version of you to go, hey, Brandon, check it out.
That's
Let's
why
do
you
this.
have to have someone
So
who takes
key,
care
man,
of you
because you know this stuff, but it's like, man, even you couldn't see yourself out of it, it sounds like. And I've been there so many times.
They also have to hold you accountable to certain things, and you have to realize, like, this is one of the things in my going through this experience, and also just in my education, is like, there's a purpose for our medical system that we have. I think part of it is overworked and manipulated more by money than it is by trying to get people better. But I mean, my neurosurgeon last year saved my life. I would have died. I have kids, I have a wife. Like, now I can say that without it hitting me so hard. I've processed it a little bit more, but it's like, it never really hit me even until a couple weeks after. So the way I always give the series of events is because there's an event that happened with my daughter that sort of kicked everything off. So it was like, it was a weekend because Halloween was on a Tuesday. So that Friday before, my daughter's in school. She's in kindergarten, my oldest, and she had put a rock in both of her ears, and one fell out and the other one got stuck. And we tried everything to get it out. It was like wider in the back and skinnier in the front, so we couldn't get it out. It was like wedged in there. So we had to take her to urgent care. She probably scared every kid inside of that place because she was freaking out. The lady had to use like multiple tools. Once she gets it out, she's like, oh, and then she was fine. She was normal. Ear's fine. Saturday, I go into the clinic. I go see patients. I come home. I don't do anything. Sunday, don't go to church. Stay home. Watch the Cowboys game because I'm a big Dallas Cowboys fan. That was the last time I can remember eating, as we ate that day. And then Monday, because I'm still like not feeling 100%, but I'm like, I can function. I love how we determine like function. I'm probably
well, you're also a tough
best.
guy, so you're just like, like you said, give me a rice, give me that rice pad, and I'm gonna put it in my ear, and we'll just get through this.
You know, sometimes you're like, I have to do what I have to do because I got to keep going. My wife's a stay-at-home mom. I'm like, hey, we got to keep going here. a detriment and a benefit all in its own.
Same for my wife, so I'll be 100%, dude.
So Monday I wake up and sick as can be. I'm like trying to go in the bathroom and throw up, and nothing's coming up. I'm doing this like 2 or 3 times an hour. Can't get out of bed. My wife was like, "Do you remember my parents being here? They came here and checked on you." I was like, "I don't remember any of that." Like I did that basically from 5 in the morning till about 3 in the afternoon, and then finally fell asleep. And I was like, "Man, I'm in my brain. I'm really sick. I've really run myself too thin. I just need to rest." That's always where I go to. I'm like, if you're sick, there is a component of you need rest. But for me, there was way more that was going on.
And I always think too, because I get a way in my head, I'll get 6 steps ahead of myself and how I need to heal myself. And I'm like, you know what? Occam's razor, what is the most obvious and probably practical thing that's going on? Just rest.
What simply can we do? And there might be some things that you're like, how would I overlook that? Can be done here. So I finally fall asleep at like 3. I wake up the next morning thinking I'll be better. Worse, still trying to throw up, and now I'm breaking out in sweats. I can't figure out what's going on. And Tuesdays is the day that both my girls go to school. So my wife gets up, takes my oldest to her kindergarten, takes the other one to her Mother's Day Out program. When she comes back, she's like, "What do we do?" And I'm like, "Something's wrong. You gotta take me to the hospital. Like, I clearly can't figure this out, but this is getting bad. You gotta take me." She's like, "Well, what hospital do we go to?" And there's one close to the house, and I'm feeling so lethargic. I haven't been able to eat or really drink anything. I'm like, I don't know the closest. Of course, that's where my head goes. Like, take me to the closest. Well, she's like, "I'm gonna take you to the place where I originally got my CTs and MRIs done because you're in that." She's like, "You're in that system. That's where I'm taking you." Calls her parents. They meet me there. My like in her 60s mother-in-law is basically carrying me in. Like I can barely walk. She's like holding me up while I'm walking into the lobby. I sit down and I'm still like nothing coming out, but I'm like dry heaving, and I go, "If they're gonna need me to walk back, you're gonna have to ask them to give me a wheelchair. Like I can't walk. I can't, like I'm literally shutting down." And we get back to the room, and I know the lady looks at me and then looks at the bed, and she's like, "Shit, how are we gonna get this guy on this bed?" So she's like, "Can you get yourself up on the bed?" I was like, "Yeah, no problem." Hop up on the bed, and I'm thinking like, now we're here. This is y'all's job. Y'all are gonna figure this out. I'm gonna go to sleep, okay? So I'm like slowly going in and out of like being asleep and being awake. I can remember like a few things, but most of the stuff is like, the way I describe it is like, I remember her constantly taking my temperature, trying to figure stuff out, and them asking me questions. My wife kind of filled in more of the story. She was like, I got mad one time because they were like asking me some cognitive questions to see where I was at. And I was like, "Come on guys, help me out." Like I was asking them to give me the answer. And my wife's like, "We can't tell you, like you have to answer her." And so all I remember was eventually I fell asleep, and I couldn't wake up. Like I could describe to you just like this, like I'm still in my body, but I can't describe, like,
Yeah.
Because also when this happened, you know, when I come out of my surgery, my pastor has come up to pray over me. My wife has had to reach out to all my patients to get things rescheduled. Like I just have, I'm surrounded by prayer at this point, which is amazing. But you know, my in-laws are like, "Oh my gosh, you're a miracle. Like it's a miracle the way everything went down." We have to understand the hospital that my wife took me to is where my doctor who did my surgery was already there doing someone else's surgery and got the call in for me. What happened was my resting heart rate started to drop down. So they're like, "Hey, we're going to take him back for a CT." My wife had left to go pick up the girls from school, and my father-in-law was with me. Calls my wife, "Hey, they're taking him back to do a CT." My phone's sitting over there, but I'll show you. They run the CT, they do a full body and a head. I have like a potato-sized lump of bacteria that's growing inside of my head back here. Like, and it's my head, so it's a pretty large potato that's going on here. So they're like, bring me out, catch my family up. "Hey, this is what's going on. We're going to take him back for surgery." And like the pictures freaked me out, dude. My mother-in-law has pictures of me just like out of it on the bed. They've got me intubated. I have this stuff all over me, and my wife is just standing there next to me. Like the amount of people that at my church and in my community were like, "Oh my gosh," and coming up to me, and I'm like, I really appreciate that. But I'm always like, I appreciate everyone that was there for my wife. Like y'all have to realize I was sick and had like a rough month, but I'm like, that day was like this long for me. Like I went to the hospital first thing in the morning. I don't remember anything else the rest of the day. They kept me sedated the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I didn't wake up till Wednesday. So that was the longest day of her life. I guarantee you, we've had kids, we've gone through all this stuff. They made her sign papers that I might not wake up. I might wake up different. this, like, she has to sign a paper that, like, hey, I'm going to allow you to hopefully save my husband's life. Please take care of him. And then she has no clue what's going to happen. And all I remember is, I told you, I'm like in this all I remember is getting super cold at one point, which I'm like, that must have been when I'm back for the surgery and they've got everything going on. So wake up the next morning, best I have felt in months. I can hear out of my ear. Nothing hurts. I have this big pad on my head. I like go to reach up on my head and I'm like, I'm still kind of processing, and my father-in-law's there and he's talking to me, and I'm like sort of like getting everything together, and it's like, hey, this is what happened, and we're breaking everything down. And then you have the whole, I was in the hospital for multiple days. They got to watch over me. Some of my family comes in town. They're coming up to see me at the hospital, and then they would leave. So like, it was a weird roller coaster, like just the day setting in. That first night I slept good because they kept me sedated, but the next night I couldn't really sleep. Like, the bed moved to kind of make sure that you're keeping blood flow going.
Yeah.
And so I just couldn't sleep. And so the next day my nurse comes in. She's like pulling the curtains open. She's like, we need to order you food and all this. And my wife shows up. She's like, what do you need? And I'm like, can you just close the curtains and like turn the lights down? Like, I just want to rest.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I just literally had freaking brain surgery. But I don't think, for me, everyone's saying the words. Like, sometimes I think people say things about you that you just aren't aware of or can't see sometimes. And it just takes something that gets it to click. So 2 weeks we do a follow-up with my doctor at his clinic. And his like nurse tech that's there, she's worked with him for like 10 years. As soon as we check in, they call us back, we go to her room. She's like running into my room. She's like, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. We've been waiting to like see what's going on. And I'm like, okay, cool. And she's like, how are you? And I'm like, I've been great. Like, I've basically been doing nothing. I've been riding around in the passenger seat with my wife. Like, everything to me is normal. I'm good. I got to go home the day so I checked in Tuesday. I got to go home on Sunday for the Cowboys game. I was very excited. Get to go home. I get to sit on the couch. I get to not be in the hospital anymore. I got this cool new haircut where the side of my head was shaved. It was a whole thing. But
it was a blast.
I'm such a nerd. I'm like, can you explain to me, like, how does this process work? Like, I know, like, so if you look, you can see, like, I've got so it kind of wraps around.
I'm very curious too, because I've got to imagine this is a very rare thing. And now I'm listening to your story, man, and you're actually freaking me out, because I freak out as a parent with 2 young boys. I've had my kids with earaches and things in the past, and it's like, I always calm myself down, like, it's an earache. Like, that's what it is, and we're going to treat it.
But intrusive thoughts get the hell out of you.
Well, to your point, though, I know I'm also very bad at just thinking it's an earache. Like, I'm going to treat it like that.
Right.
Where I had something with my son recently where he had 3 weeks this year. He's a very healthy kid. He's healthier than my oldest, and he had a respiratory issue that lasted for 3 weeks, and I've never had him. He's a guy that gets sick for like a day, and then within the end of the day, he's back.
That's always me.
Exactly. And so when this was malingering, I then started to panic, because I'm like, I'm not going to go get antibiotics unless I really have to. Yep. But what if I don't, and it creates a viral infection or a bacterial infection, and then he loses his hearing? Yep. I would feel the worst. So I know, like you said, there's a time and place, and I always try to remind myself, when do I need to go see a Western doc?
Yes.
When has it gotten past this? And, luckily it didn't manifest anything, but it's like, to your point, though, it's like, it's an ear infection, here's some antibiotic drops, like, we're done. How does this thing, were they able to explain, like, this is crazy, like, how could this have possibly happened, and how could we have detected it sooner? If anyone else is listening, how could they detect it sooner and say, I mean, I'm even wondering how this has changed your practice, because, like, I'm sure you're the same way with people, like, listen, it's migraines, it's one of these 2 things, we're going to heal you up. Yep. And now it's like, well, there's this very rare chance it could be a bacterial infection, and we've got to rule that out. Is there a way we can rule it out sooner, I'm wondering, too?
I definitely think so, and I think a lot of it is, like, I should have done something sooner, and I probably would have prevented that. Like, some of the stuff that I left out is, like, I was getting so bad, the mom's like, I'm taking you to urgent care. She took me to urgent care. I thought I might have a sinus infection, because sinus infections can impact migraines. And so the lady checks me out, and she's like, no, but you have a pretty gnarly ear infection. I'm going to put you on an antibiotic and a steroid. And when she did that, my ear started leaking for, like, several days. Like, I literally had this fluid that was, like, coming out of my ears.
Yeah.
Should have been a big-ass red flag. Really big. What
did you tell yourself? instead.
I just assumed like,
You're like,
man,
it's leaking out.
Yeah,
it's
like
the drainage system's
something's draining.
lymphatic
like
is draining it out. Big
like
deal.
the side of my head swelled up. I got a picture of it, and then like I just started getting this like waxy drainage out of my ear. The problem was the type of bacteria that got into my brain. It's called Streptococcus aeruginosus. It's known for creating a lot of pus. It takes a very specific antibiotic in order to treat. So when she gave me a broad spectrum, it wasn't going to make an impact on that.
Right.
So I think it's getting ahead of something sometimes before you need to. There's nothing wrong with that. I would be careful with antibiotics because I think we're over antibiotic as it is, and it really has an impact on our gut biome.
I agree.
And then that has an impact on our neuropeptides and our hormones, and that has such an impact on other important functions that we have to be careful. Like the doc that we work for with my daughters gives us a probiotic that it will not respond to the antibiotic that they're on, so that we can still have some level of that, and then work to get their gut bacteria back after we've done that if we need to.
Yeah.
The lucky thing for me is when someone ends up, so I tap my mic here, when someone ends up with me, they've probably had such a vast level of testing that would have caught that.
Yeah.
Mine is such a, I'm the exception, not the rule. The thing that I always tell people is like, if you have a feeling in your gut that something is wrong and something's going on, you have to really lean into that and keep going. And a lot of times that's what ends you up with someone like me, because you're like, I know there's something going on here, and then I watch your videos and it's like, this started to make too much sense. Basically, Dr. Denning's explanation, which Dr. Denning, if you don't, he's literally one of the like top 2 neurosurgeons in Dallas. He's the guy that you would want. He just so happens to be in the flipping hospital that I'm in on the day. I'm like, God literally, there was no way that it was like, my wife's just going to randomly, it was like, hey, orchestrated for me to be able to go to the right place, because apparently I have a purpose. I believe it's helping people who struggle with migraine, and probably more than that. But like I said, I'm such a nerd. When we get to go sit down with him and he's going over everything, I'm like, can you explain what you do? Because I'm like, this isn't my world at all. And so I'm like, do you pull the muscle back? Do you cut it?
Seriously?
Like, what do you do? So he's like, we shave the skin down. He's like, we cut through the skin, we lay that down. He's like, we cut through the muscle and lay that down. He said, when we did that, there's a hole in your skull that the bacteria had gotten through, and he thinks that's how it got into my brain, then ate through the surrounding, and that was how it got in. My wife and I assume that's when I had the seizure. I think my system short-circuited, and I think that's when the bacteria got in. And then since September 1st, that bacteria was in my head growing and multiplying.
Even
and
going back to the seizure part, that could have been another red flag where it may have been.
The problem was we did what we were supposed to with that one, and that's the hard. And they did a lot of tests, but they wouldn't. Here's the thing: is your doc needs to listen to you. They have to listen.
The standardized test based on the seizure would have never picked that up.
I just don't
bacteria.
think, and I don't think it would have been. It hadn't formed anything yet. Like imagine if there's just a few of us. It's like that hasn't formed anything yet. But you get a mass mob of people, and it's like, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah.
So it hadn't really done enough yet for that to be the problem. So it's sort of this like. The way that I looked at it, and the thing that I told myself to give myself comfort, is if anyone else had jacked with it, it would have really messed me up, because that was probably the heaviest day that we had because of what Dr. Denning told me. So when his nurse came in and she was all freaked out and she was all excited, I go, hey, I got a question. Have you ever seen this before? She's worked with him for like 10 to 12 years. She goes, never seen it before. And I'm like, you've worked with him for a long time, never seen anything like this before. He comes in, and so we're talking about all this, and I go, have you seen anything like this before? He goes, one other time. He said there was a guy, his guess was he had had some sinus issue that was going on. They had gone in and done some sort of procedure. He thinks when they did that, they caused a damage that let the bacteria get in.
Wow.
By the time the bacteria got in there and they found it, because he was going in to have another procedure, that's when they found it. They sent him and metaflighted him to Dr. Denning, and by the time he got there, it was too late. That guy didn't make it. So Dr. Denning's done 2 of these basically, and I'm one of 2.
Your test
it's
case
50-50.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that day literally we leave. Like I can remember texting my mom and telling her like the whole, just to keep her updated. And I'm just like, my mom's like, oh my God, like this goes back to the like, it's a miracle. Like what a blessing. Like God absolutely had to have his hand on that, because I've told you a lot of stuff. You want me to tell you the part that fascinated me the most? So when you do anything with the brain, if they're swelling, what happens is they have to leave your brain open. So they literally will leave it open until the swelling goes down. So as you can imagine with this, I've got a lot of swelling on my brain. So we cut through everything, cut the muscle, right? Cut through the dura mater to look at the brain. He's looking at the CT to see where it's at, and he's looking for this pus, this mass of pus. Pops itself out. Like as they're looking through the folds, it was just looking for an opening to get out. My brain was like swelled up and squeezed, like holding it right there. And as soon as there was a place for it to go, popped out. But he said as soon as the mass came out, my brain immediately went and relaxed right back down to normal. Just like immediately.
Yeah, wow.
And I was like, okay, that's cool. Cause he was like, we cleaned up a couple more pieces out. We closed you up and like that, like, my surgery doesn't go like that. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't go that route. It's like there's so many things that had to happen. Now, I got the joy of, I still have my little mark here. I got a PICC line that was put in, and I had 6 weeks of antibiotics I had to do twice a day. They would mail them to us, and I had a nurse that would come to my house once a week to check, and my wife would do them twice a day at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. She would literally, gloves on, tie it on, put it in there. Like she had like 4 things that she had to give me. And I had to do that for 6 weeks. I did it like all the way up until like just past Thanksgiving, basically. But I was like, that's not normally a route I would go, but I'm like, we're not going to play around with this. I'm not going to play around with bacteria that's in my nervous system.
I agree.
So we went that route. Now getting back into the gym, the hangover from antibiotics, I was like, I feel like I'm starting all over again. Like I was wrecked. I can remember going in the first day, hopping on this bike. We were like doing a bike to warm up. My coach was like, all right, let's get 10 air squats. I did 1 and my quads locked up. I squatted down and my legs just like seized up and I was like, and my coach kind of knew. I had been like keeping him up to date. I'm like, hey, I had a seizure. I just want you to know. Hey, and then it's like I'm gone for a little bit and then I come back and I'm like, hey, so this is what happened. He's like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no. Kind of crazy situation, but it's like, I think that moments like that exist, but the reason to bring this like way, way back to like the stuff that I do is like, you've got to go find your Dr. Denning. You've got to go find the person that's going to do that. And like Dr. Denning's was like, boom, in that moment, I'm ready, did his thing. Mine sometimes is a little bit longer with how I'm working for patients, but I've been dealing with patients that have had this for 10, 15, 20 years sometimes. And my thing is we have to do something different than what everyone else has been doing in order to be able to get you better. So I know we kind of talked about like, hey, is there stuff that people should be doing? It's like, listen to your gut and your intuition, know when something's off, and it's okay if your doctor doesn't want you asking questions, I suggest you fire them and get a new doctor. I'm totally fine with patients asking questions. I'm open to the possibility of being fired by a patient. Our relationship should be done that way. If you're a bad employee, if the guy who cuts your yard sucks at it, if the restaurant that you go to is not good, you're not going to go back. Yet when you go to a doctor that sucks, maybe you're just like, well, I think that's the only place I have to go. Yeah. And when it's in the migraine world, you have to realize trying to get into some of these neurologists is a 3-month, 9-month, 18-month wait that they're waiting on, all while they're still struggling to be able to get into this person. And sometimes for them, they just get the same feedback that they were already getting. They get told the same stuff. They get the same information. And they're like, well, shit, this isn't anything new. I waited. I got excited. I got my hope up, and then nothing changed. Yeah. So it makes it more frustrating for them, if that makes sense.
What about blood sugar dysregulation? Is that a common thing for migraine or no?
It can be, but it's hard to put it in... It's so hard with migraine to just be like, hey, it's this. Blood sugar regulation, I feel like, is definitely becoming way more popular for people to understand. Is a lot of things that we struggle with as a society. Sometimes we do to ourselves based on how we've just fallen into the comfortability of what the standard American diet has become, or what the Food and Drug Administration tells us is an adequate thing to eat, yet red meat is the enemy. So, we don't have to get into all the subjects with that, but it's...
I was just curious how much of that plays a factor. I know you didn't mention it earlier.
I mean, if I see that if I'm seeing signs that I think that that's a factor, then I'm going to be like, hey, do you want me to guide you through this? And do we want some help, or do you need me to set you up, or are we doing something? Because a lot of times, if they're doing something and they're trying to work towards it, then I'm like, hey, this can definitely be a factor, because the reason I will never rule anything out or say, oh my gosh, I can never have anything, because a lot of people, when you specialize, get super honed in.
Totally.
Well, my thing is, your body is,
And you
your
know,
body's
like,
like
hey,
a
listen,
car.
these 4 pillars, 90% is going to work. And then there's those 10% that challenge you as patients, but make you a better practitioner.
Yeah,
and then
because
you're
they
like,
have a
well, let me
genetic thing,
try
or they have
this.
something going on. But it's like, if you look at your body as a car, tires have a purpose, brakes have a purpose, wiring has a purpose, my windshield has a purpose, my oil and gas, like all the things that are in there, but they all work to make sure that the car runs. We can't just say, you know what, I think you'd be all right with 3 tires. Could you drive? Yeah. Would it be terrible? Yeah. Would it cause more damage to the system overall? Yeah. So it wouldn't make any sense for that to be the approach. And sometimes I think we do that. We're just like, well, you could drive with 3 or we could do this.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get it. We have to work with what we have. I don't really try to judge anyone based on where they've been. I judge our system, which I think does a really shit job of offering up or even looking into why would we try to use this approach or what are we doing? Like in the migraine world, they're really close to being right. They just don't know how to apply what it is that they're trying to do in order to get people better.
Yeah.
And for me, like I told you, my wife was sort of an accident. My first few patients were an accident. Like in my schooling, you're not taught. Like it's like a percent of a percent of a percent of, and it's like for test questions, it's like patient presents like this. It's a chronic migraine versus like we're not educated on that. So for me, it was like I had to start doing all this stuff outside of it. I had to start diving into these things to go, first of all, why is this working for these patients? What is it that's going on? Because when I first dove into this, I'm like, just let me look up migraines. It's like, migraines are the most common disorder of the nervous system. And I'm like, nervous system is what I specialize in.
That's what you do. You are a chiropractor, yeah.
They're thought to originate in the brainstem. Well, in the special type of work that we do, doing upper cervical work only focusing on your neck and the top 2 bones of your neck, I'm like, holy shit, that's where we work. That's interesting. And you start to just realize how this has such an impact neurologically. And then you go, whoa. The problem is you had a neurostructural issue that was creating, distortion of your brainstem, the signals being sent by your brain. You don't understand that can affect temperature regulation, hormone regulation. Of course, you're going to be in pain all the time, but also that's going to affect and impact the structure around it. So increased pressure in the head is, of course, going to cause pain in my eyes, pain in my head, pain that I can't understand, even though my brain doesn't have any pain receptors. It doesn't know. It doesn't have anything that tells me that that's what's going on. So when we start to unravel this a little bit, we have to realize, like, as I start educating myself on, I'm not formally educated on medications. It's not I can't recommend or take anyone off, and I don't. But when I'm going to educate myself on your mechanism of action, how does this thing work and what is it trying to do, and understand that you realize the side effects of this could be perpetually over time, based on how long this person's been taking this, cause a greater impact. Because most of the migraine medications will have such an impact on what are called your neuropeptides. Your neuropeptides are like little enzymatic building blocks that your body needs in order to make certain actions happen. Imagine you're like, I need you to pass me that, otherwise I can't go do this. And it's like, what do you mean? It's like the way things work in your body. It's like, I need this, and as soon as I give you this, you can go do that. And then I'm like, cool, when you're done, this is empty, bring it back to me. Or there's cycles and ways that things work. What you have to realize is when we start chipping away at the little building blocks, or how they naturally work to manipulate your body's physiology, that then starts to create long-term problems that your body is already compromised, you're already neurologically compromised, and now we're piling on a lot of times rather than trying to get to, in my opinion, the source of the issue. Because like I told you, you're right. I always foundationally talk about the pillars that we need in order to be hitting. There is stuff that we need, but you can't bitch at someone that's sick to go move when they can't even get out of bed.
Yeah.
How does that make any sense? We've got to focus on why they're in so much pain and why they're not functioning right, and then they're going to be more likely to make those healthier habits that you're going to recommend. But a lot of our system, people will get upset with me that don't agree the route that I go or what it is that I do, or they have misconceptions about chiropractic, or the thing that's funny about chiropractic, and I get this because you brought people on, is people actually, I don't think, form their opinions themselves anymore. their family had a bad experience or our family did this. And so because of that, this is just now how I think rather than ever really being able to formulate my own opinion
1000%.
about something.
For me, it's always about results anyways. I don't care what you do. If you're the migraine guy and you do some weird chiropractic maneuver, I don't care. Does that make me feel better? And if it does, I'm going to keep seeing you.
And is there, for me, it's always, we've got a system. Like I can take you through my system and process and explain. It's like, oh, that makes sense. When people come in who struggle with migraine or are willing to give me an opportunity, they're like, hey, that makes sense. And then when we start talking about the results that we get, nobody gets. So within the first 12 visits of working with us, about 86% of our patients notice a decrease in the frequency and intensity of their migraines without any medications, without any of that stuff. It is strictly with what we are doing. And I only do one thing when we start. It's we're not throwing in 6 things. It's we're only working on the structural component of what it is that's going on in order to get you better. And it's like, this is, for me, as you can probably hear and tell, it's like, this is what gets me fired up because it's like, we're right there. We're just missing this. And because we want to, piss and moan about stuff and it's always an argument, it's always a fight, it's like, hey, you could be upset and do that, but at least be willing to hear what I'm saying and then filter it through your own process and not just disregard me because, I've had plenty of times on social media where the hate comes and runs strong. But I've also had to realize, like, I'm probably never going to be able to even engage with those people anyway. They don't want to. It's not the route that they want to go.
They are literally just want to hate on people.
But for me, it's allowed me to make a greater impact. So there's part of that I have to be comfortable with of like, I'm going to have to do it differently. But because of that, it's like, that's okay because I'm willing to know. And the thing I always stand on is, listen, my wife had migraine. I have 2 daughters. They have the potential to be more predisposed to migraine because their mom had them. Does that mean that they ever will? No. But the type of care that I recommend and give to every single person that comes and sees me is also what I and my family receive. So I'm going to, anything that I recommend, anything that I talk about, anything that I stand on and I'm like, you should absolutely be doing this, I've done and I've tested and I've had people do, and I'm like, this stuff works.
Yeah.
When I talk about grounding on social media and people are like, but grounding isn't based in science. And I'm like, let me just pull up a few studies here for you that talk about this. And I'm like, I did this the other day with my barber. So I've been with my barber for like 7 years now. He was telling me this the other day. I'm like, I can't believe I've been coming here for 7 years. It's like my little mini hanging out with my guy, a little therapy session.
I was going to say, he's a therapist.
But a few weeks ago, because we follow each other on Instagram, he had some issue that was going on with his leg. He got some weird infection. It was painful for him to walk. And he's like on this whole, he's trying to get himself back healthy. He was walking on, and he's like, went to the hospital. He has this like infection or something that was going on. And he's like, it's getting better. I have this wound. It's trying to heal. And I went and got my haircut literally Wednesday before I came down here. And I was like, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you something. And this is going to sound a little weird, but I need you to do this. And he's like, what? And I'm like, go outside and stand barefoot for like 15 to 30 minutes every day. And he goes, really? And I was like, yeah. And I'm like, listen, I know some of the stuff of grounding, but because someone had to say, well, grounding is based in science, I did a whole video where I was like, let me grab your comment and then let me just throw some of these up. But there's a study of multiple studies, and what they did was they've seen this for people who are having wounds that would not heal on their lower limbs, so lower legs, feet, that would not heal. They made people start grounding. Boom, healed. For people with COVID, they were doing grounding patches on their chest. That was improving them. For babies in the NICU, they'll put grounding mats down. What they realize is that puts them in a more parasympathetic rest state because the babies can be stressed out because they've been removed from the womb and the environment of mom, and it can cause, and so they need them to be as calm as possible. So there's all these, and they've talked about the impact it can have on your heart health. There's so many things that when you look at it and it's like, it makes no sense to people, and I'm like, that's the problem. Is sometimes we just need to think logically and think, we didn't used to have shoes all the time. We didn't used to be so disconnected. We didn't have concrete and things everywhere. We could get outside, do that. And so in that study they show, and they're like, hey, this is when this was added in. This is when we started having cell phones, and it's like, this is when everyone started wearing rubber-soled shoes. And it's like, it goes crazy with the impact of like, we're being disconnected from the earth. So when you go outside and you do that, there's a whole, you can get behind the science and explaining like what you're doing in the exchange of positive and negative ions inside of the body, but you have to realize the impact that it can even have neurologically, because I will recommend this for migraine patients, and they're like, I get heat from that too, because dude, in the middle of a migraine flare, how in the world do you expect me to go outside? And I'm like, I don't know, slip something on and be able to get out there, or get a grounding mat. You can get those things for $25 on Amazon, and you can literally lay inside of your house. You don't have to go anywhere. You can put it on your bed if you want and lay on that.
Yeah.
But this, if you want the science, I'm like, then the science is the science. That shows you and explains to you that you can use this and it can have an impact on your health. So I'm like, if it does that and it's free, then why are we not implementing it and using it?
Exactly. Dude, you have an amazing channel. I think anybody who's, you don't even have to suffer from migraines. If you just want to know more about health, follow you, because I've seen some of the stuff you did, even correlating migraines to vitamin D levels, which I would have never thought of. I mean, so definitely go check you out. I know I want to wrap things up with you, but dude, tell everybody where they can connect with you, find out where do you live? I know you're on TikTok and Instagram.
Yeah.
Where can they learn more about you, and your community, if they just want to join? Do you have free communities where people can just become a part of, or is it paid if they want to learn more about that? How can they work with you?
Yeah, so at the Migraine Doc on TikTok and Instagram. We're also going to be starting putting more content on YouTube, so you guys can check it out there. I'm pretty sure I got the same name there. Our community is on the School app, so SKOOL. It's the place where you build communities. It's like Facebook, but it's its own community. So I get it. It's another thing that you have to download. But for me, if you're only joining my community, you can join other communities if you want. But it's like, that's where I house my community, because let's say a social media platform goes away or something happens and I've built up this audience. Then all of a sudden you lose me and you're like, well, crap, where am I supposed to find that? Like, the amount of people that call me all the time because they're like, hey, I found you on TikTok. When that was 3 or 4 years ago, that was so weird. Now I'm like, if you didn't find me on TikTok, that's weird. Where did you find me? It's like, how did you come across this? So what we do on there is, that's a monthly membership that you are a part of with the Migraine Society. You get a free copy of my book whenever you join. So it's like, you can buy my book if you want, but I give it away for free when you're in my community. I've got free guides that I give in there. I do podcasts every month. I do a live Q&A every month. I do interviews with other experts to bring them in so that they can share their knowledge of, hey, you might want to start implementing this in order to make impacts with your health. So for me, it's a place where for a small amount of money, I would hope people could say, hey, I can come here and be a part of a community that I think is more like-minded and positive, and has a place where you have, in my opinion, a doctor who cares. And I'm constantly trying to study and learn. So that's the place where I share things. So you can go to, I think it's school.com/the migraines, or school.com/migraine society. And you don't even have to do any of that. Go to my Instagram or my TikTok, and there's a link tree that's on there. And inside that link tree, you can find the link to all my stuff. If you wanted to schedule something, do telehealth, get a part of my community, like, you can do all that stuff inside of there. I try to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah. Dr. Brandon Brown, the Migraine Doc. Dude, so good to have you on the show, man. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you.